according to Mark. This is from chapter 7. The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were unclean, that is, unwashed. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they have given their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of their elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash, and they observe many other traditions, such as the washing of cups and pitchers and kettles. So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders, instead of eating their food with unclean hands?" He replied, "Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, these people honour me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to the traditions of men." Again, Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a man can make him unclean by going into him. Rather, it's what comes out of a man that makes him unclean. For from within, out of men's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside, and it's they that make a man unclean." This is the gospel of the Lord. Please sit down. That gospel reading with all that stuff about washing kettles and things. Sorry, am I in the wrong place? Could be a good start for a coronavirus sanitizing sermon, but I'm not going to mention that. The gospel this morning reminds me of that story in Matthew that you'll know. Do you remember the story of the man who had 2 sons? Yeah? Two sons, and the father says to the sons, "Go off and work in the vineyard." And the first one says, I will, but doesn't. And the second one says, "I won't, but does." And Jesus says to the people, which of them does the will of the Father? And he doesn't actually answer the question, but it's clear that it's the one who does the Father's will. And whatever is said is the one that gets Jesus' approval and blessing. Do you know anyone who says all the right things, but then lets the side down during the week? Hands up if you know somebody like that. You do, because you know me. Well, you kind of know me. I mean, I certainly go into that category, and I suspect, if you were perfectly honest, you probably admit you do as well. All the things that we say on Sundays, all the things that we aspire to, our good intentions on Sunday, how easily they, you've only got to go out to the car park and find you've got a flat tyre. I suspect unworthy thoughts come into your heads. They certainly would mine. So, like today's gospel, that story of the man and the 2 sons seems to be saying that it's not appearing to be obedient or holy or to have all the right answers that matters, but actually doing the job. You remember those lovely words from the prophet Micah, who sums it all up as saying, "Do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God." You can sum it up. And James's epistle, we don't often hear James's letter in church, but James is very interesting because he's almost in a loggerheads with St. Paul, who, you remember Paul's great message is that it's believing, it's faith that redeems us, it's faith that enables us to be part of Christ. And it's nothing to do with what I do, it's nothing to do with how good I am, it's all grace and mercy. And that's all true. James, however, comes along and says, well, what's the good of all that if your life is rubbish, if you don't do anything for anybody else? So James's little epistle, only a couple of chapters, is saying, faith's fine, but on its own, it's no more use than anything else. It's actually how we behave to one another that really matters. It's when the rubber hits the road that we have to deal with, the people we find challenging. And I think we all know who they are. People who are aggressive, people who are ungrateful, or the people we just find it really hard to like, and certainly hard to love. I think we've all got those. And it's easy in church, isn't it? We're all in our, best behaviour when we're here. But once we go outside, how easy all that crumbles away. At the bus stop, at home, when we meet that difficult person, that's when it matters. That's when our faith, our discipleship is really tested and when it's on show. And of course, when we fail, as we do, inevitably it gets the church and us individually a bad name. You all know that old thing, everybody talking. You hear that it's said in Tesco's or whatever, Mrs. Thing, she goes to church, yes, Christchurch, Edinburgh, and every week she goes, and she's the biggest gossip in our street. You should hear the language she uses when she's talking. We let ourselves down, we let the church down, we let God down by our failure to be the people that God wants us to be. And sometimes we fail because we're afraid of getting it wrong. Think of the Church of England and its appalling, convoluted attempts to come to a sensible decision about divorce, or women's ministry, or same-sex relationships, or with racism, or with the environment. The church produces report after report after report. We have general synod debates till the cows come home about whether it's right or wrong to do this or that or the other, and all the time we're doing that, and nothing happens. While the world, people out there, people down the street who never come to church, they get on with it, doing the right thing. And that kind of delay, that hesitancy, that sitting on the fence, gets us a bad name too. The story of the Good Samaritan, you've known it since you were little. The two guys who pass by the man in the ditch, the priest and the Levite, they're saying, I'm not sure it's right to help this person because it might mean that I get unclean and then I won't be able to go to church and celebrate the service. Or the other says, but he's a foreigner, I'm not allowed to touch foreigners. So they're being run by the rules in their head rather than by the compassion and the love in their hearts. And that's why Jesus in today's gospel reading contrasts believing the right thing, doctrine he calls it, the rules, the things you've been taught, things that reading from Deuteronomy is about. Teach your children and grandchildren the rules so that they know the rules. And that's why Jesus takes such a tough view of a lot of the Old Testament and of the Pharisees and the scribes, because what should have been a message of love and openness and liberation has become a kind of bunch of rules that you have to... And of course, if there's a rule, you can always find 17 different ways of avoiding it. When it comes to showing compassion, offering forgiveness, being a peacemaker, caring for others, does it really matter why we do it? We don't know why the son who said at first, no, I won't, but then did it. We're not told why he changed his mind. Jesus isn't interested in why. But the fact that he did change his mind and did the Father's purpose is what matters. That he changed his mind and did it. And there's another story as well, isn't there, about two sons and a father in the New Testament. That too was about the stroppy one who went off the rails, went off and fed the pigs. But he too changed his mind, came to his senses, came back, said sorry, started again. And it was he Not the righteous older brother who kept all the rules and felt sore about it. It was the younger one who got the father's blessing, and all the fuss was about when he came back and returned home again. So, there's hope for us all, even for those of us who don't get it right very often. However muddled we may be, and unsure we may be about whether we believe in God, and I guess if we took a little survey between 1% and 100%, there'd be, even the people here this morning, there'd be a lot of variety about it. Some people who say yes, some people who say, well, I try to, I think I might, I'd like to. You know, we're all at different stages on that spectrum, aren't we? We don't have to get God right. We don't have to understand the mystery of God. We don't have to answer all the questions that theologians and philosophers grapple with. Jesus didn't ask anyone, is it okay if I touch this man with leprosy and heal him? He didn't sit on the fence considering the pros and cons about whether he ought to defend the woman taken in adultery. He didn't say, sorry, can't heal you today because it's the Sabbath. The rules were less important than the deed for Jesus. He did what love and justice require. We can all be filled with good intentions, I'm sure we are. I'm sure when we leave here today, we'll go out there thinking, this is the day when I can make a difference to the world. We can mean to do the right thing, but we're so easily dragged off course. Speaking personally, I don't know about you, maybe you're perfect. Today, God feeds us in this Holy Sacrament with his own life. He gives us a chance, like those sons in the stories, gives us a chance to start again and says, now, my people, my friends, my children, my brothers, my sisters, show the world what love looks like in action.